What happens when two women, bound by years of tension and heartbreak, come face to face at a funeral? And not just any funeral, the final farewell to the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley. As emotions ran high and grief filled the air, an unexpected encounter between Priscilla Presley and Ann-Margret left those closest to the moment stunned. What unfolded defied all expectations and revealed a side of their story no one saw coming. Stay tuned, because you won't believe the shocking twist that changed everything that day. Elvis Presley was more than just a man, he was a phenomenon. As the king of rock and roll, his charisma and talent captivated millions, but his personal life was equally as riveting as his performances. At the heart of his story were two women who played vastly different but equally significant roles in his life. Priscilla Presley, his wife and the mother of his child, and Ann-Margret Olsen, his fiery co-star and rumored lover. Their connections to Elvis were profound, each shaped by their own experiences of love, passion, and heartbreak. Yet these bonds would ultimately place the two women on a dramatic collision course. The tension between Priscilla and Ann-Margret simmered for years, fueled by whispers of an affair during the filming of Viva Las Vegas. The on-screen chemistry between Elvis and Ann-Margret sparked rumors that quickly spilled into their off-screen lives, creating a media frenzy. For Priscilla, the reports weren't just headlines. They were a dagger to her already fragile relationship with Elvis. As the rumors swirled, her frustration reached a breaking point, leading to explosive moments of anger. In one heated confrontation, Priscilla, overwhelmed by jealousy and betrayal, hurled a vase across the room, screaming, "I hate her!" This raw, unfiltered emotion captured the depth of her anguish and the volatile nature of her feelings toward Ann-Margret. But this wasn't just about jealousy. It was about the crumbling foundation of a marriage under public scrutiny. Elvis, who thrived on admiration, denied any wrongdoing while simultaneously suggesting that Priscilla needed to accept the realities of being with someone like him. The strain left scars on both women, even as they tried to navigate their own lives apart from the man who had so profoundly shaped them. Little did they know, their paths would cross again years later in a moment of unimaginable grief, leading to an encounter no one could have anticipated. The air around Graceland on the day of Elvis Presley's funeral was thick with grief and disbelief. Thousands of mourners from across the world gathered to bid farewell to a man who had not only shaped music, but had also left an indelible mark on their hearts. Inside the mansion, Priscilla Presley watched in solemn reflection as fans poured in, some openly weeping, others in silent shock. The sheer emotional weight of the moment was overwhelming, with an almost eerie stillness punctuated by the occasional sound of sobbing. It was a day where time seemed to stand still, as the king of rock and roll lay in his casket, surrounded by flowers and the deep ache of loss. Outside, the scene was equally surreal. Throngs of people clung to the gates of Graceland, many collapsing under the weight of their sorrow. Some mourners fainted from a combination of heat and heartbreak, while others lingered by the casket inside, their tearful gazes fixed on Elvis as though willing him to rise. The disbelief was palpable. The idea that someone as larger than life as Elvis could truly be gone was a reality too heavy for many to bear. The collective mourning created an almost electric tension in the air, a mix of anguish and reverence that seemed to ripple through every corner of the estate. In the midst of this emotional whirlwind came an unexpected arrival that sent whispers rippling through the crowd. Ann-Margret, Elvis's stunning and enigmatic co-star, stepped into Graceland, accompanied by her husband, Roger Smith. Her presence alone was enough to shift the energy in the room. Eyes followed her every move as speculation grew about what might happen next. Ann-Margret's connection to Elvis was no secret, and her arrival undoubtedly carried a weight of its own. For Priscilla, who was already navigating the sea of emotions brought on by the day, this moment could have added an entirely new layer of tension. What would transpire between these two women, once rivals, as they stood under the shadow of the man who had bound their lives together? As the mourners filtered through Graceland, each paying their respects to Elvis Presley, the room seemed to hold its breath when Ann-Margret stepped forward. Her every movement was deliberate, her face a mix of grief and determination. Clad in somber attire and accompanied by her husband, Roger Smith, she carried herself with the dignity befitting the occasion. But her presence alone was enough to send a ripple of tension through those who knew the history between her and Priscilla Presley. This was a moment no one could have anticipated, a face-to-face encounter between two women whose lives had been deeply entwined with Elvis, each in vastly different ways. Priscilla, seated nearby, watched as Ann-Margret slowly approached. A flood of emotions likely surged within her, memories of past animosities, rumors, and the pain of betrayal. It would have been easy, perhaps even expected, for old grievances to resurface in that charged atmosphere. But as Ann-Margret drew closer, something unexpected began to happen. The sincerity in her expression, the weight of her grief mirrored in her eyes, seemed to transcend their shared history. This was no longer about jealousy or rivalry. It was about mourning the loss of a man who had profoundly shaped both of their lives. When Ann-Margret finally reached Priscilla, the brief interaction that followed was quietly monumental. According to Priscilla's account in her book Elvis and Me, Ann-Margret expressed her condolences with a heartfelt sincerity that caught her off guard. Anne expressed her sympathy so sincerely, I felt a genuine bond with her, Priscilla later wrote. In that fleeting moment, years of animosity seemed to dissolve, replaced by a mutual understanding that only they could share. It wasn't forgiveness in the conventional sense. It was something deeper, an acknowledgement of the unique connection they both had to Elvis and the grief they now shared. But how could two women, once bitterly opposed, suddenly find common ground in the face of such loss? What was it about this interaction that left Priscilla feeling a bond she never thought possible? The answers to these questions lie in the complexities of their shared experiences and the emotions brought to the surface on that somber day. The moment was as surprising as it was poignant, leaving those who witnessed it wondering if grief has the power to heal even the deepest of wounds, or if this was simply a fleeting truce in the shadow of the king's final farewell. The emotions running through Graceland on that somber day were as complex as they were overwhelming, especially for Ann-Margret. Her connection to Elvis had always gone beyond mere admiration. She once described him as her soulmate, a bond so profound that his death left her utterly inconsolable. In her memoir, she admitted, "He is a part of me, of my happiness and sorrow, and that will never go away." The grief she carried was not only for the man she had once loved deeply, but also for the irreplaceable friendship they had shared. Even in the presence of her husband, Roger Smith, the depth of her emotions for Elvis was evident, etched into her every expression and gesture as she stood in Graceland that day. For Priscilla, the funeral was a transformative experience, one that forced her to see Elvis through the eyes of others. Watching the thousands of mourners who had traveled from across the world to honor him, she began to truly grasp the vastness of his impact, not just on her own life, but on so many others. Among those touched by his legacy was Ann-Margret, a woman who had once been a source of pain for Priscilla. But in that moment, as she witnessed Ann-Margret's sincere grief and heartfelt condolences, Priscilla's perspective began to shift. It was as if, for the first time, she saw Ann-Margret not as a rival, but as someone who had also been profoundly shaped by Elvis's presence and devastated by his absence. Their shared pain created a connection neither of them could have anticipated, making that day at Graceland unforgettable for reasons far beyond the loss they were mourning. What unfolded between Priscilla Presley and Ann-Margret that day defied all expectations. Rather than reigniting the bitter rivalries of the past, the two women found an unexpected solace in each other. Standing amidst the grief-stricken crowd at Graceland, Their shared love and loss for Elvis created a bond neither of them could have anticipated. It was a quiet, deeply human moment where the weight of their shared history melted away, leaving only the mutual understanding of what it meant to love and lose someone as extraordinary as Elvis Presley. In that brief interaction, they seemed to transcend their past conflicts, united by a connection only they could fully comprehend. This remarkable encounter revealed the complexity of human relationships, particularly those tangled with emotion, history, and fame. It showed that even the deepest wounds can momentarily soften in the face of shared grief. What might have been a tense or even confrontational moment became a reflection of how tragedy can bridge the most unlikely divides. Priscilla and Ann-Margret, once set against each other by jealousy and pain, found themselves navigating the same sorrow, discovering a fragile but meaningful connection in their shared memories of the man who had profoundly impacted both their lives. But the question lingers. Did this moment mark a permanent change in how Priscilla saw Ann-Margret, or was it simply a fleeting truce born out of the overwhelming emotions of the day? Was their bond at Elvis's funeral a sign of genuine reconciliation, or merely a temporary peace in the shadow of a profound loss? The answer remains as elusive as the man who brought them together, leaving us to wonder about the enduring power of love, forgiveness, and the ties that bind us, even in grief. If you found this story as captivating as we did, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the untold moments of Elvis Presley's life. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about this surprising bond between Priscilla and Ann-Margret? Could grief truly bring reconciliation, or was it just a momentary truce? Let us know. We can't wait to read your opinions, and don't forget to share this video with your fellow Elvis fans.